2 is about respecting boundaries and thresholds. So here's one of the things that's interesting and shows us the wisdom of children versus what happens to us when we become adults. Children, you never have to tell them to check in with their bodies. They kind of just know what's going on with their bodies, right? They know when they're upset. They know when they're angry. They know when they're tired. They know what they need, and they respond to what they need almost without us having to even check in with them. The older we get, the less in tune we are with our bodies. This is connected to this ask number 2 of respecting boundaries and thresholds. So here's an example. Have you ever been in a challenging, heated, rich, colorful conversation, discussion? Some might call it an argument, maybe a debate. And you can kind of, if you were paying attention to yourself, if you were paying attention to your body, you can feel your body having its own response separate from your words to the conversation, right? We might feel sweat start to bubble up. We might feel heat in our face. We might feel our hands, our palms sweating. We might feel the hairs prickle on the back of our necks. We might feel our stomachs turn. We might feel our legs or arms get a little bit agitated, maybe tension build up. This is your body's way of saying, hey, friend, I am not okay right now. I don't know what we're doing, what conversation we're in, but we're not comfortable with this conversation. So friends, are you paying attention to your bodies? Are you paying attention to the fact that right now, your mind, your body, and your spirit are telling you, we are not comfortable having this conversation in this moment? So what this ask requires of us is to think about, is this a real fear? Is it a real threat? Or is this my discomfort and this is something that is really a growth opportunity? This is an invitation to stretch, right? We may not know, and this is where we need to pay extra special attention to your body. So the word that I want to introduce into this space regarding this conversation is somatics. Somatics is paying attention to our body. Soma, somatics, right? And a lot of the things we don't pay attention to, especially as it relates to trauma, is that trauma often has a physiological manifestation. Now remember, these 9 asks are a way of us creating, co-designing safer, braver, and more courageous spaces. Part of the reason why we do this is because there have been perhaps times in your life and the lives of other people you care about where having conversations or having experiences that may or may not be connected to our own sensitivities, predilections, may have caused us some kind of harm or maybe a deeply distressing experience. By definition, that's all a trauma is a deeply distressing experience. So when we're paying attention to our bodies, which is where trauma lives, right? We can have an external experience and then it transfers into our body and we hold that negative energy. So when we're stressed, overwhelmed, traumatized, burnt out, all of that is living somatically in our bodies. That's why we want to pay attention to somatics. So here's the deal. When we are respecting our boundaries and our thresholds, I might be engaged in a conversation and it might hit a pivot point and I'm uncomfortable in this moment. Then I have to scan myself totally and completely. I have to do a holistic scan of myself and say, is the threat that I'm feeling real or perceived? I might even ask myself, is the threat that I'm perceiving internal or external? Am I afraid of them and their response, or am I afraid of me and my own response? Is this reminding me of a conversation I've had before that didn't go well? Is this reminding me of something that I don't want to talk about? And then what is it about that conversation that I don't want to have again? What is happening in this moment that's letting me know that I need to take care of myself, right? If we do ask number 2 correctly, that means that I'm paying extra special attention to what's going on with me. That might mean if I feel like I have some capacity, I might lean in and say, I'm just going to stretch a little bit. If I don't feel like I have capacity, I might have to step back. So when we're talking about this particular ask, there's a couple things that I want us to pay attention to, which makes this ask so very important. Let's validate this for a second, right? The first thing I want us to think about is code switching, particularly cultural code switching. And I'm really listening to and leaning into those of you who might be watching this video right now who identify through some lens that may have been othered in some capacity, right? Perhaps you live life through the identity as a woman, or perhaps as a person who is LGBTQ plus, perhaps as a person who is Black, Indigenous, or a person of color. We sometimes refer to that as BIPOC. Perhaps you live life through the lens and identity of understanding what it felt like to be economically disenfranchised. Perhaps you are differently abled, right? So you understand what it feels like to not be in we can't really call it the majority, because we know that there are sometimes cultural majorities that are not in positions of power. But we know in some of these identity lenses what it feels like to be othered. Now here's the thing, the notion of code switching infers that when I am in some places where I don't feel safe, when I feel like I'm in the minority, sometimes what some of us either choose to do or have been trained to do in efforts to feel understood, to feel safer, is sometimes there's a choice to switch from what is natural or what is authentic for me into something that might be more palatable or acceptable for other people. I'm not talking about the music I like. We're talking about the music you like. I'm not eating the food I like because I don't want commentary about you. If you don't like how my food smells or tastes, so we'll eat what you eat. We're going to do the things that create the least amount of conflict. And it almost always, through cultural code switching, benefits the other versus me. But it perhaps might make me feel like I'm protecting myself or being safer. The challenge with extreme cultural code switching, or cultural code switching that goes on for a really long time, for a long duration, months, years, even for some people, decades, lifetimes for some people, is it forces us out of the space of being able to sit in our authenticity. What happens then if I can't be me? What happens if I can't be me day after day, week, month, year after year? The risk is, what if then I forget or lose touch with who I actually am? So when we're able to respect boundaries and thresholds in a way that is authentic, and I can honor that I'm uncomfortable right now, it also allows me perhaps to make a more careful, more clear decision on if I choose to code switch or not. Is this a situation where I think something's happening that makes me feel like I must? And if so, then do I lean into the 9 asks to address the thing? Or do I make a choice to code switch for my own protection, which might be getting into an issue of boundaries and thresholds? The second thing that I want us to notice regarding the validity of this specific ask is this thing about being numb, right? So one of the things we recently just talked about was the physiological manifestation, right, of trauma, the somatics of our body. And one of the things that can happen as a trauma response is to just turn it off, right? You know what? When my mind and my body and spirit are talking and they feel dysregulated, I separate them, right? So some of us go numb, we dissociate. We say we're gonna put our thoughts over here, our bodies over here. I don't feel anything, nothing is affecting me. When that happens, how then, if I'm not in touch with my body, if I'm not in touch with my body, mind, and spirit, all talking, all being in communication and synchronicity, if I'm not able to do that, how can I practice ask number 2 of respecting boundaries and thresholds? This ask calls for me to be in tune with what's going on with me. Am I okay? Am I not okay? What do I need in this moment, right? If I'm doing this well, then I'm honoring how I feel and how I'm taking care of myself. To not practice this well means I am not in touch with me and what I need. And here's the thing. If I don't know what I need, and I don't know what needs to be provided for me to feel safer, how on earth can I do anything to help you feel safer? I can't protect your boundaries and thresholds if I don't know where mine are, right? This is why this ask is so very important. So let's do a little bit of background on where this ask number 2 came from. I want us to consider this tension and then a balance between, if I'm opening up, how much am I opening up? Or if I'm gonna kind of lean into this, how far am I gonna lean into this, right? And what's sitting underneath this is this idea of self-care. Can I open up more and be okay? Can I go longer or further in this conversation and still be in good care of myself, right? We're needing to think about the totality of our experiences, the totality of our identities regarding respecting boundaries and thresholds. This means perhaps I can go there in a conversation. How many of us have had the experience where we had a conversation, it went further than it should have gone, we went further than we should have gone, and then afterwards we feel like trash. I should have stopped way back there and I didn't, and now the conversation's over, but I have to take care of myself. I have to sit with myself after this. And am I angry? Am I hurt? Am I confused? Am I embarrassed? Now I got to take care of me and perhaps everyone else in my household or my community or my workspace. If I'm going to be in good care of myself, I have to do a good job of practicing this ask. And this means I'm paying attention to how open, how far I can go, how deep I can go, how long I can be that deep, and what care I'm going to need for myself, not just in that moment, but after the moment is complete. So now let's talk a little bit about the risks and the rewards of practicing ask number 2, which is respecting boundaries and thresholds. When folks asked about this one, right, when this was presented to me so many years ago, people were thinking regarding ask number 1, if I'm going to be open and honest and vulnerable, that means we're going to have a real conversation. How far can I go? The risk is, what if I go too far? And now I'm what we sometimes in the space refer to as emotionally bleeding. I have bled out my story. I told too much. I went too far. I feel overexposed. I feel raw. I feel way past vulnerable to the point of feeling exposed and in danger. There's a threat to my safety, to my covering, because too much information has been shared. I went too far. Another risk of this is not far enough. If I don't go far enough, I share nothing. This becomes yet another transactional conversation. It is flat. We went nowhere. You didn't see me. I didn't see you. We didn't practice sawubona. We are not here. We have not brought each other's existences into the space. I didn't recognize your humanity. We just did surface level again because I didn't press into my threshold. I didn't stretch my boundary. I didn't see if I could go further than this. And there's a million different reasons why I may not have. But at the end of the day, if I didn't, we're still in the same place we were in the beginning of this conversation. And we asked, perhaps it was worth it. Was it worth it? I'm asking you. If you didn't stretch, you didn't grow, nobody moved, you stayed exactly where you were, did anybody grow? Was it even worth having this conversation if we didn't push and press and we didn't challenge ourselves regarding respecting our own boundaries and thresholds as well? The other risk with this on a deeper level is trust, right? Trust is a messy thing. I have had many times in the practice, the application of the 9 asks, someone asked me, well, I don't trust people. I just don't. How do I work on trusting people? So this is one of these weird, funky virtues, friends, where the only way to have more trust is to trust. You just have to practice trusting. Here is how trust relates to trauma experiences. If I have had a deeply distressing experience that involves me trusting someone and the trust being betrayed, it is going to take more effort for the same exact behavior pattern for me to trust a new person in that situation. And they may not know that, right? Have I even communicated that at all? They may have no idea that they're walking into a fortress of distrust with me because you look, smell, feel, sound, taste, touch like something that betrayed me before. And now you're going to have to do bonus points for me to even almost think about expanding, opening up my boundaries and thresholds to talk to you. The concepts of going too far, not far enough, and this element of trust, very much a risk inside of this practice of this ask number 2 of respecting boundaries and thresholds. So here's the good news. If we take the risk of practicing ask number 2 in an honest, genuine way, there's a couple beautiful things that can happen. There's one thing, this first thing that I want to share with you called the chaotic path, right? There's a model. It's a framework that looks like a Venn diagram. Can you see that? This is my terrible attempt at not having graphics and doing a Venn diagram. It's 2 overlapping circles. And on one side we have chaos, and on another side we have order. And then there's a tiny sliver in the middle of the overlap, right there. this overlap. This in the middle, that's the sliver where the growth happens. When we have too much chaos, there is disorganization, and we don't grow. When there's too much order, we are bored and we don't grow. The other thing that we want to pay attention to regarding this chaotic path is when we get way, way, way too far in control, we end up having, when we get too far in order, there is a control problem, right? Now I'm trying to have control over in order to maintain the order. When we have too much chaos, we can get into disaster and it just becomes mayhem. We don't want that either, right? We're trying to get more toward the inside of this. How close can we get to the overlap? When we get to the beauty of the chaotic path, and part of this is the reward of pressing for those boundaries and thresholds, right? I stretch myself a little bit. That makes me grow. Growth only happens when we're uncomfortable. We never really grow if we're completely comfortable. Where's the stretch, right? But if I have a little bit of tension, I do grow, right? That is a good thing. That is a great thing. Friends, we sometimes call that evolution. The second thing that's a reward in this space is this beautiful thing called neuroplasticity. We sometimes feel like we're locked in our own thought processes, but the brain is malleable. We sometimes say, I want to renew my mind. I want to make a new mind. Well, that's actually a real thing. We can actually do that. And it happens part of with this growth thing, right? I stretch, I do a new thing. I didn't know I could do that. Think about the metaphor of how when we work out, we tear up the muscle, and we need to tear down the muscle, wear it down so that it can strengthen up and get stronger. We're kind of like that too. What must be so for you to stretch yourself, be a little bit uncomfortable so that you can grow? Some of us may make the conscious decision to be stuck, and that's a thing. That's a thing. And some of us can make the conscious decision to lean into growth. It will be uncomfortable. Some of it will be mucky. Some of it will look like a hot on fire mess. And when it's done, we will have evolved into the next beautiful iteration of who we are and who we are called to be. There's always a risk and there's always a cost, friends. And there's some beauty in the cost for ask number 2 of respecting boundaries and thresholds. So a couple considerations for you. Sometimes we get a little bit stuck. Sometimes we want to press, but we can't, right? And we say, why can't I go further than this? So I want us to think about what is causing the block. There's a power in that one little 3-word powerhouse, which is why. If you don't know what to do, do a why tree for yourself. Why am I having trouble with this conversation? You might produce an answer. Why is that a difficult thing for me? Whatever that answer is. Well, it's difficult because, we've had this conversation before and it didn't go well. Why do I think that particular past conversation didn't go well? Well, part of might have been connected to who we were talking with. Well, why am I projecting that past conversation on this conversation? Because I'm afraid the thing will happen. You see, if we practice this why question, this may be a consideration for how we can stretch ourselves in the application of ask number 2. The other thing that I want us to consider is that where there is a practice of healthy boundaries, not a fortress, but where there is a practice of healthy boundaries, knowing I can go or I cannot go for my own protection, we must also consider, which is another talk for another day in detail, expectations. Where I may need to create a boundary, I may need a realistic expectation of what's really going on. For example, if I have been, we'll call the nice word, invited into a healthy debate with someone, but I know that that person is not on a pathway to their own growth, their own enlightenment, their own holistic healing, do they have the ability, do they have the capacity to practice the embodiment of the 9 asks for us to have a rich, healthy dialogue? Or do I know that this person wants some smoke? If you want the smoke and I'm trying to be evolved, I need to have a realistic expectation that that person may not be engaged in this conversation for the right reasons. And in that case, I need to be mindful of where and how I set my boundary and my threshold. So the last thing is this, friends. We are now all the way to the end of thinking about this ask number 2. Challenging ask. It looks simple until you start practicing it. So where do we start, right? I want us to think about checking in with ourselves. regarding the application of this and how we start ask number 2, respecting boundaries and thresholds. 2 questions that I want us thinking about. This is our fake homework, right? 2 questions I want us thinking about regarding the application of ask number 2. The first one is, how am I? How am I really? Right? What is my capacity? How am I feeling in this moment? What was my mood before I entered in this conversation? Do I already feel myself escalating in my mood, my energy? What is my body doing? What is my body telling me? How am I really? Am I ready for the turn up? Do I already feel myself shutting down? Am I scanning myself to see, how am I? How am I right now in this moment? That's probably the first indicator of telling me what I need to know, how I need to respond. The second part that I want you to think about and where to start for the practice of ask number 2 is, what do I need? How am I? And what do I need? Based on how I realize I'm doing. I am okay, I'm not okay. That thing needs something. What does it need? What do I need? And do I have the ability to provide myself with what I need for the practice of this ask? Do I need a moment? Do I need clarity on what someone's meaning when they're saying something? Do I need to explain myself? Do we need to set ground level expectations about how we're going to handle this conversation? The last time we talked about this, it didn't go well. What if we do A, B, and C? Do we need to say, I will only give this a certain amount of time? What do I need to be able to navigate this conversation in a way that will make it easier for me to take good care of myself, for me to grace myself and to grace you before, during, and after that conversation? Friends, respecting boundaries and thresholds is ask number 2. And if we practice this one well, if we practice ask number 2 well, we can not only take great care of ourselves, that means we can also take great care of each other.
Our energy is contagious. So what if I heal myself so that when I come into these new human spaces, what I actually bring inside of shadows is light? Thank you, everybody.